probably want to acknowledge, we think we set boundaries for other people. And that's where I think we get really conflicted, as we are restricting somebody else, or we're preventing something from happening, when the reality is that the boundaries that we're setting are actually setting us free and giving us the freedom, as the analogy presented itself with the children, to be able to move and be in a place and space with comfort, with confidence, and with courage.
Hi everybody, we are back and we've had a little bit of a break. A lot of things going on. Michael started a new job, and so we appreciate your patience as we've had this outlined for weeks.
Right.
But yet have not filmed this. So we appreciate you guys hanging in there with us. And I think this is going to be our last relationship series topic that we're going to do for right now.
Okay.
We might be taking some questions from you guys to see if there's some, just like take questions and see what you guys have questions on. But so today we're going to be talking about boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people may have heard this word, but maybe don't exactly know what it is. So of course, like always, we're going to kind of talk about what the boundaries mean, and then go into what does that look like. So I heard a while back this really good analogy about kids playing. And so there was this study done where they put kids in a play space and there was no fence that they put the kids to play in. And so the kids kind of all huddled up together in the middle because they weren't sure where their boundaries were of safety. And so then they did it again, and this time they had a fence along the perimeter of the play space, and the kids were everywhere in the fence line. You know, they were all the way up to the fence and had felt the freedom to play in the expanse of the space they were given because of the fence line, which was their boundary, right? And so I love that analogy for boundaries, because really what boundaries are doing for us is they're giving us the freedom that we want to feel safe in the space of life, basically.
Sure.
So, boundaries are things that we set for ourselves, but they're important for relationships. So, as adults, you know, it's our responsibility to set those boundaries for ourselves so that when we interact in relationships, that those are already established, already in place, and that we can have healthy relationships. So once again, you know, we keep going back to this, and this is probably very annoying to people, but this is the truth, and kind of this comes back to where we started this, which is relationships really start with us and our health. So why do people have all these issues with relationships? Because they haven't taken the time to assess themselves.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that relationships are going to look like perfect all the time, because if you're relating to somebody or trying to relate to somebody that's not necessarily healthy, that's where we run into situations.
Right. And I think before you keep going, I just want to highlight the fact, just two quick things. The first thing is that Katie said a couple times here that we set boundaries for ourselves. And I think that's important to know. Sometimes and often we probably want to acknowledge, we think we set boundaries for other people. And that's where I think we get really conflicted, as we are restricting somebody else, or we're preventing something from happening, when the reality is that the boundaries that we're setting are actually setting us free and giving us the freedom, as the analogy presented itself with the children, to be able to move and be in a place and space with comfort, with confidence, and with courage. The second thing is that it's important that we understand those boundaries for ourselves for the relationships that we not only are born into, but relationships that we choose to have with one another, whether that is types of friendships, or whether that is in dating, or whether that is relationships with our parents and or with our siblings and other family members.
Yeah, that's good. So we go into this having to examine and know ourselves first. And I think that a lot of people don't know themselves and don't take the time to examine themselves. So here's just some questions that I came up with, and maybe I'll put these in the comments or whatever so people can come back to them. But, what gives me life versus what feels depleting?
Yeah.
What do I have a passion for? What makes me uncomfortable? What makes me upset and why? Where and with whom do I love or want to invest my time? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What is important to me? So these questions are really creating your set of values and priorities. And
Yeah.
we've said this before, whatever we value, we prioritize, whether we realize it or not.
Sure.
So if I value my family, that means that my priorities need to circle around my family in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
If I value, working hard, then work is something I prioritize, those kinds of things. So with those questions, we're able to say, okay, this is what feels healthy to me. This is what I need to be able to function optimally the way God's created me to function, and those kinds of things. So once again, what Michael was kind of alluding to, when you think of offense, you're like, oh, well, I'm protecting myself. And in some ways, right, you're saying to other people with that boundary, people can see that, right? So usually it has to do with what we say or what we do is kind of what people see our boundary, right? Now, they may still try, like you think of a fence, people might try to climb over the fence, right? That's not that, it's not, but it'll keep a lot of things at bay.
Right.
And you're still going to have to deal with, our boundary is ours to keep. That doesn't determine what they're willing to do or not do. So we can't be surprised if somebody does, right, try to cross that boundary, right, of whether it's our time or our energy or, whatever, that might still happen. We're only really responsible for our response to the boundary that we're setting for ourselves. So if somebody tries to cross the fence line, right, if somebody tries to go too far, then it's up to us to say or do whatever to maintain the boundary.
Right.
We can't prevent everybody.
Right.
Right.
And I think that's so critical because other people's decisions and lack of boundaries cannot impact or they cannot determine how we hold on to our boundaries or how we enact or protect our boundaries. The case in point is we can talk about how you enter into someone's house and you can observe whether people take their shoes off or not. You can observe where and how comfortable people are in spaces and places. And when somebody comes into your house and they don't see the boundaries that you already have set within your home, you've given them the freedom to now demonstrate to you what their boundaries are or their lack of boundaries. And I think that it's important to know that I ill-advise us to forsake our boundaries for someone else's lack of boundaries.
Right. We don't want to respond to people's lack of boundaries in kind, basically.
Right.
And that's actually, just generally part of being an adult, right? We manage ourselves according to how we want ourselves to be, not in response to what others say or do. Right. We have our own set of standards and values and all those things. And so this is really about us maintaining our health. And that was what Michael said is leading right up to this next point. When we set up a boundary, other people might not like it.
Right.
But is it worse to have people not like the boundary we set, or to have no boundaries and be upset all the time because we have no boundaries?
Right.
So we're always choosing something.
Sure.
Right? And so we might have to communicate explicitly to people.
Sure.
We wear shoes in our house, or we can wear shoes in our house, or we
Right.
don't wear shoes in our house, or I can't commit to that invite because I already have these XYZs going on. We don't talk like that in our house, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
I can't be your personal assistant.
Right.
You're not paying me for that, or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. But they really matter because it keeps us being authentic to who we are.
Right.
And it really keeps us healthy overall to maintain those things. And we're going to feel pressure either way.
Yeah.
It's are we willing to kind of deal with the discomfort that it may cause us to say and hold those boundaries in the moment? Or do we want longer discomfort of having no boundaries and feeling like we don't have any,
Yeah.
management over our own lives?
Yeah.
So, for my personal example, we like to put in here, these are things that we've learned from experience, not just that we like to talk about. So, I used to apologize like all the time. And you might think, oh, well, what does that have to do with boundaries? But what it is that like, I was not really valuing myself and seeing myself as an inconvenience, and not being willing to say, I'm not responsible for everything that goes wrong in other people's lives.
Right.
And even the other day, he doesn't know I'm going to share this right now, but the other day he forgot his lunch, and there was a set of things that kind of transpired after that moment, but I made his lunch for him the night before. So it was there for him to take. So I felt like I upheld my part, but I was really wrestling the next day when we were talking about bringing him his lunch because I didn't have a vehicle. I would have to walk. I'm going to have to make sure the kids are at the house, blah, 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 blah. And I was really wrestling with like, is this my issue?
Mm-hmm.
And so I ultimately decided that it wasn't. Like that I had upheld my end of the thing, and I could, apologize for not going to get the car earlier from getting its oil change, blah, 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 blah. There's all these things. But I kind of had to pause, and I really had to wrestle and like talk to God and say, okay, is this something that I really need to be apologizing for? Is this something that I really did, or is this just circumstantial and I did my part and I need to kind of let the events play out? And so for me anyway, the apologizing and kind of taking more responsibility on is something that I used to do a lot that I have stopped doing since. But there's still going to be scenarios, right, where we have to kind of step back and say, oh, is this really necessary, or am I
No, that's absolute.
Overcalculating?
And so here's the other side of that, because I know you're interested, right? You heard her side and what she did, and here's what's great about being on the same page with your partner in relationships and understanding boundaries. When she called me and she gave me her explanation and asked me some questions, and I was in a meeting and I took the call because I was hungry. All those things are happening to me. But what I knew is that it wasn't her fault. And I knew that it was an inconvenience. So all my response to her was okay. I got it. No problem. I'm going to get back to my meeting. I appreciate you calling me. Thank you, and love you. See you later. And in that moment when I hung up, I knew that God had not only successfully broken our hearts and mended them together for the sake of one another, understanding that the condition that I'm in does not press upon her the opportunity or press upon her to change her boundaries for me, nor for me to beat her up about having boundaries. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it wasn't, again, like sometimes we think, oh, people are being malicious in pushing against the boundary, but sometimes people just don't know. Or
right.
People, because we're different, people just operate differently and don't think about it always, because we all of us do stuff that we don't really think about what we're doing or saying in the moment at some point in time, right? And so it wasn't that I thought Michael was intentionally trying to push up against this boundary, but I figured that he hadn't really thought about it and didn't know the whole scenario and all the things that went with it. So that's kind of what happened there. So in conclusion,
Yeah.
we just want to go
Wrapping
back
it
to
up.
this, how we think about it. Is this thing that's happening, is this life-giving for me and life-giving for the other person? Or do I keep running into the same issue where I keep being frustrated over and over again, going through the
Yeah.
same cycle of frustration with, that same theme, different scenario,
Right.
basically. And so that's really what it's about. Am I negating my mental, emotional, spiritual, even physical
Yeah.
health
All of it.
for, this keeping of the peace with somebody
Yeah.
or whatever? So that's what we want to share with you guys today. We hope that this
Can I get a note in? I just know she's gonna hit me upside the head about the what is it called? The bishop close or apostle, whatever you call it.
bishop
Yeah.
closing
So
that never really
here's
closes.
we can't leave. We've heard God in the moment. We've heard we felt the presence of God in all that we've said. So here is the direct point to Jesus and God being present in boundaries, because the scriptures teach us to be in the world and not of the world. And in order for us to successfully be in the world and not of the world, we have to have boundaries set. Jesus is a demonstration of those boundaries. It's why he left places by himself to go be with himself and God, so that he can refuel himself to re-engage with the people of the world so that he could do it in a healthy way.
But I would say too that more than that, yes, you need to be able to re-engage in a healthy way and maintain your boundaries. And then the follow-up to that is that we see Jesus, when people wanted him to be something that he was not and do things that he was not there to do, he was not willing to acquiesce to that. He was not there for political power or control or anything like that. And he did things the way that he intentionally wanted to do them, and stuck to that.
Yeah.
And he wasn't willing to negate his
There you go.
purpose
Yeah.
and plan. So,
There you go.
okay, now we can close for real, for real. Bishop's closing complete. All right, you guys, we'll see you later.
Thank you. Drop a chat, send a like, support us how you will. We love you, and we'll talk to you next time.